All right. Continuing from our last lecture, we'll now see how is it done, auto scaling done on Azure, and what are the best practices. Okay. So as I mentioned to you, generally how is it done is using the metrics and the rules. The scaling in and out happens. So we'll now see how the metrics and what are the different types of metrics and how do you kind of define the threshold and the rules. Okay. So I'll just do a quick demo also, but before that, let's see one important thing. What is the relationship between auto scaling and app service plan? Okay, as I mentioned, the app service plan comes with a pricing tier, right? So you have kind of decided which kind of tier you have. So that particular pricing tier needs to first have the ability to auto scale. Okay, and if the pricing tier has the ability to auto scale, then there are two things that we have to take in consideration. One is what is the maximum instance count that it has, okay, and what is the underlying hardware that it is using, okay. So let us say that you are on a, a premium or P1 V2, which has got, two CPU cores. I'm just writing very randomly. Do not quote me these numbers. Let's say 16 gig memory. Okay. And it has got, let's say, max 10 instances. And when you are creating the app service plan, maybe you selected default instance as 3. Okay. So whenever auto scaling gets triggered, if you are scaling up by X number of instances, the X number of instances will have the same hardware as that of your pricing plan. If you really want your X number of instances to have better uh, hardware, then first you'll have to change your pricing plan, and then auto scaling will create instances of the new pricing plan. Remember that not all app service plans have auto scaling enabled. So anything which is free or shared or even basic tier doesn't have auto scaling enabled. So you will need at least a standard or a premium tier. Isolated has the maximum number of instances allowed. I think it is 1,000 instances for isolated. So that this is where the maximum scaling is allowed. Okay. So why do we even have the maximum count, right? Which is called a runaway auto scaling, which means let us say you keep on increasing the auto scaling and it keeps on in adding more and more instances. There should be a limit to it, right? Otherwise, how will Azure ensure that you're you have selected the right app service plan? So that's where the limiting comes into picture, that if it has reached the maximum instance count, then it cannot scale beyond that limit. Okay, so let's quickly see on Azure how it is. So we have already created an app service. uh, okay, but I think we had created it with a free tier. Let us see. So you can actually go and say scale out. Remember, scale up is a different thing. Scale up actually means that you're going to change the premier plan, sorry, the pricing plan. So if you see here, currently it is shared. So in an ideal scenario, I mean, the auto scaling should not be available for this resource. Okay, so we need to basically go to uh, let's say premium. So I'm scaling up. Okay, either I could have scaled up or I could have created a new service plan which is a premium in the same region and in the same resource group. If you remember, that those are the constraints for changing the app service plan. So now I have changed. So when I scale up, you can see that I have an option to basically manually scale, which means that I can keep minimum instances 3, or I think the maximum for this plan is 10. Okay, now here comes the custom auto scale. Basically here, if you see, I can create a rules based out of a metric or scale to a specific instance count on a schedule, right? So I can basically create a metric and say that instance limit says minimum this, maximum this. Okay, and the default is this. So we can actually add a rule to be able to basically trigger, right? Currently no rules are defined. So let's understand some theory before we do auto scaling. So I have something copied on the clipboard. So auto scaling always works on conditions. There are two types of conditions we need to remember. We can scale using a metric, or we can scale to a specific instance as per a schedule. So for example, if IRCTC every day between 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. we need more resources. Let's say we want to scale to 100 instances and default to 10 instances outside this particular window, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. every day. We could scale using this particular condition, and we have even ability to do it for a given date time, or only during a particular time every day, or only on a particular weekday, or we have various levels of configurations that we can do. Now, when we say scaling using a metric, what is a metric, right? So, different metrics are captured actually by Azure. That could be a CPU percentage, memory percentage, disk usage, HTTP requests coming in, data out. There are multiple other metrics like socket inbound connections, socket outbound connections, TCP connections. So, depending on what kind of application you have and what is your way of deciding whether the demand is high or low, you can pick up such a metrics. Okay, now we have few concepts called as uh, time intrinsic, time aggregation, duration. Okay, so in order to explain this, let me open an Excel. So let us say that you have 5 instances. Okay, and this is a minute. Okay, like this is the 8th minute, 9th minute, 10th minute. Okay, every minute basically you gather the metrics. So if we decide that we are going to gather the metrics of CPU percentage, let us say in the first minute the the CPU usage is 70 for instance 1. Oops, sorry. Okay, I think the percentage symbol is fine. And the second minute is 70. So let us say you're gathering the CPU for each of the minute. So if it is 70 in the first minute, 80, this instance 3 is 30, instance 4 is 40, instance 5 is let's say 35. Okay, so here you have something called as time aggregation. Aggregation meaning simple mathematic, right? You can create you can calculate minimum, maximum, count if it is applicable, average, right? If the time aggregation we select it as maximum, it kind of creates a max of these. Okay, if we say that time aggregation is average, we basically calculate the average of these. Sorry. Similarly, we do that for a particular duration that you decide. Okay, because 1 minute data is not really very realistic. So you kind of have to do it for a given duration that is again configurable. So by default, I think we select a 10-minute duration for calculating the metrics. Okay, so let us assume that even in the second minute, it was the same. I'm just going to drag it for ease. And let's change a bit. Some changes, right? And the time aggregation is going to be the same. Now here I need to again at the end of the 10th minute I need to calculate the aggregate again. So this is the time intrinsic aggregation. So if the time intrinsic aggregation is we select as an average again, so basically it is like an average of the averages. So which means the overall CPU utilization at that given point in time is 52%. Now I could write some rules like if the CPU percentage is greater than 50%, right? Uh, you scale by 2 instances. If the CPU percentage is less than 30%, you scale down by 2 instances. Okay, so this is how you do. So in this case, since we said that it is more than 50%, you actually scale up. Now after the scaling is done, because scaling comes with some sort of an overhead, right? So after the scaling is done, there is a cool down period, whatever you say, right? Like let's say 5 minutes. So during this 5 minutes, you do not do any calculations. After the cooldown again, you will do the time aggregation and the time intrinsic aggregation for the next 10 minutes and see whether the CPU has come down or gone up. Dependingly, you will scale in or scale out, right? So it's very important that you are writing conditions which are paired conditions. When you are doing a scale out condition, you better write a scale in condition. So in a single rule, you can add multiple conditions. So now you may be considering, let us say, I have similar to this, you have another rule for memory, let us say. Okay. And if I say my memory, if it is greater than 50%, then you scale, and if it is less than 30%, you do not, you scale in. Okay. So what happens if in these four conditions, conflicting conditions are true? Let us say the CPU usage is high, but the memory usage is less. So do you scale in? No. So for scale in to happen, of all the rules, all the scale in rules need to be true. But let us say that uh, the CPU usage is 60%, but the memory is less than 30. But one of the conditions is true in that case, right? So do you scale out? Yes. So scale out always wins compared to scale in. So even if one condition is true, you scale out. But if scale in to happen, all the conditions have to be true. And in case you basically want the scaling to work, even if one condition is true, you have to create separate profiles actually. You cannot create a single profile with multiple rules. You need to create separate profiles with multiple rules. And then, even if one condition of scaling is fine, uh, that will work out. All right. Uh, there we still have to do best practices of the scaling, which we will do in the upcoming session. Thank you so much. Hope these concepts are clear.